As Daniel said, my name is Jeremy Jarrell, and I'm an agile coach and a Pluralsight author. I spend the majority of my time working with organizations who are seeking to use agile practices to increase the value that they can deliver to their customers. And today, I'd like to talk to you about achieving business agility in your organization and why that can make your organization more competitive. But before we do, let's start with why you might want to pursue business agility in the first place. Now, according to a 2017 survey on business agility, embracing business agility can lead to tremendous organizational benefits, such as higher customer satisfaction and retention, increased employee productivity, decreased organizational cost, and even reduced project failures, just to name a few. In fact, 70% of the executives that were surveyed believe that agile organizations respond more quickly to dynamic business conditions. And 84% believe that this capability to respond more quickly will give them a distinct advantage over their competitors. So, given all of these benefits, it should come as no surprise that 75% of those same executives state a desire to move their organizations towards a state of business agility. However, what is surprising is that of those same executives, only 39% are confident in their organization's ability to do so. So why is that? If we can all agree that achieving business agility has the potential to bring so many benefits to our organizations, then why is it so difficult to take that first step? Well, one rather surprising reason for this is that many of these organizations have already implemented Agile in their IT or development functions, but aren't quite sure how they can scale that implementation to their entire organization. Often organizations who have successfully implemented an agile approach in one area of their organization struggle to understand that there's more than simply replicating that approach to other areas of their organization in order to achieve true organizational agility. This is because successfully implementing an agile approach in one area of your organization is not the same thing as achieving business agility throughout your entire organization. Agile is an organizational approach and a mindset that's built on the values that we find in the Agile Manifesto. Values you're probably already familiar with, like individuals and interactions over processes and tools, or working software over comprehensive documentation. Often we enable this approach by following one of the more well-known Agile methodologies like Scrum or Kanban. But agility, on the other hand, can be a little more intangible. One way to describe organizational agility is as the ability of an organization to sense and to respond to changes in its marketplace while all the while continuously delivering value to its customers. But what's important for us to understand is that while fostering a mature, agile approach inside of your organization is a prerequisite to achieving organizational agility, the terms agile and agility aren't necessarily interchangeable. One of the best ways for us to understand this distinction is to tackle one of today's most pervasive myths surrounding agile approaches. Often when you ask an organization, why are you considering adopting an agile approach in the first place, their answer is simple. Agile lets you go faster. And while this is often considered to be one of the biggest advantages of an agile approach, it actually points to a very common misunderstanding about agile. Agile does not, in fact, make you go faster. In fact, it's actually pretty common for teams who adopt an agile approach to actually slow down a bit, at least at the beginning. But what agile does do is allow you to release more frequently. This reduces your time to market, which can create the impression that your team is moving faster when in reality, they're actually not. But reducing your time to market can actually be much more powerful. As appealing as it might seem at first, simply making your team go faster isn't really that much of a benefit. After all, moving faster will get your team to its objective faster, but it makes no guarantee that that objective is even the right objective. But increasing the frequency of your release cycles allows you to get to market more often, which gives you more opportunities to validate whether the objectives that your team is pursuing are actually the right objectives, and more releases creates more learning opportunities for your entire organization, which is necessary for turning your organization into a learning organization, which is one of the first steps towards achieving true business agility. But how do you help your organization on its journey to becoming a learning organization and thus achieving business agility? Well, the specific steps to do so are going to vary between every organization, most often due to differences such as organizational culture and organizational structure, or even the organizational dynamics that are already present. But broadly speaking, there are 3 goals that must be met in order for an organization to achieve business agility. These goals are making a demonstrable commitment to business agility and all the steps that are necessary to achieve it at the very top of the organization, defining a specific plan to transition each piece of the organization to a more agile way of working in order to support this desired outcome, and creating a culture that not only tolerates but encourages the changes that are necessary for achieving business agility. Cultures that do things such as empowering your teams to create great ownership of the ultimate outcomes you are trying to achieve, or recognizing that the inevitable failures that will occur over the course of innovation as the powerful learning opportunities that they really are. Now let's take a few moments and dive more deeply into each of these goals to better understand what achieving them might look like inside of your organization. As we said earlier, the first goal on your journey to achieving business agility is to demonstrate a commitment to agility from the top down. Many attempts to transition to an agile way of working in an organization start with the rank and file employees. This is because as these employees are the closest to the very problems that agile methodologies were designed to solve, they are often the most acutely aware of the benefits that could be gained from transitioning to an agile approach. And these bottom-up transitions can actually be pretty successful. As the first team finds success with an agile approach, often their peer teams start to recognize these benefits and decide to adopt an agile way of working themselves. And through this network effect, agility can actually spread relatively wide throughout an organization. But unless the leadership at the very top of the organization recognizes the benefits that are to be gained from an agile approach and demonstrates a commitment to transitioning the entire organization to such an approach, eventually this transition that began so promising in the lower tiers of the organization is going to meet resistance, begin to stall, and maybe even die out. So in order to overcome this resistance, the higher tiers of leadership must declare that agile is the new way of working for the entire organization. But simply declaring their support often isn't enough. The road to agility is rarely a smooth one. And to truly demonstrate their commitment, leadership must support this new way of working in both good times and in bad. Because how an organization handles the bad time can tell you a lot about how deeply they've embraced business agility. During dark times, organizations look to their leaders, and how their leaders respond in regards to agile will dictate much of how their teams will respond. If a leader decides that there's no time to monkey around with agile because we have a crisis on our hands, then the organization is going to follow suit, and they're likely to abandon all of the progress that they've made so far. But if a leader decides that when bad news strikes, that the benefits enabled by business agility will provide the most value and will be the key to getting their organization back onto the right track, then they'll demonstrate their commitment to achieving business agility throughout the entire organization. But to do this, they'll need to not only stand in support of the benefits that their organization stands to gain from achieving business agility, but also in support of the organizational changes that will be necessary in order to realize that change. And the way that they'll realize that change is by creating a plan for an agile transition. Now, if you're already familiar with today's agile approaches, then you likely know that one of the most common questions in the agile community today is, how do we scale agile? This is because while we as Agile practitioners have demonstrated a lot of success in introducing Agile to single teams or even to small groups of teams, scaling Agile to many teams or even to an entire organization often proves much more difficult. And luckily, many Agile scaling frameworks have recognized the importance of answering this question and have been created in an attempt to meet this need. But most of these scaling frameworks are really only designed to address the challenges of scaling Agile to large numbers of teams inside of a specific area of your organization. And this is different from transforming every last piece of a large organization to a completely new way of working, which is fundamentally a change management problem and therefore is independent of whatever Agile scaling framework you might choose. But understand that most large-scale Agile transformations are in all reality, actually just Agile adoptions. This is because even the most popular Agile scaling frameworks often only address how to transition to an Agile way of working in the context of the IT functions inside of the organization. While these frameworks might stress the importance of every aspect of your organization transitioning to an Agile approach, in reality, non-technical functions such as human resources, sales, or finance are often left out in the cold. But if you want to transition to an Agile way of working, then creating change in your IT organization is absolutely a must. But if you want to achieve true business agility, then you can't let that change stop at the doors of your IT organization. You have to embrace the non-technical functions of your organization and bring them into the fold. This means that you must first understand whether your entire organization has fully transitioned to agility, or if you simply have a traditional organization with pockets of agility inside of it. And if this is the case, then you need to create a plan to first optimize the interactions between the Agile and the non-Agile components of your organization with an eye towards ultimately transitioning those non-Agile components to a more Agile way of working. Remember that one of the biggest advantages of achieving business agility is giving your organization the ability to sense and to respond to changes in the marketplace. If your organization is a technology organization, then your technical delivery functions, such as IT and development, might be your organization's engines, but they're probably not the helm. In order to take full advantage of the opportunities to sense and to respond to changes in your market, then your entire organization, from ship to stern, must be operating in an Agile way. One of the most effective ways to do this is by fostering an Agile-friendly culture. Now, there is no clear recipe to making your culture Agile-friendly, but there are certain qualities that we do look for when deciding how conducive an organizational culture will be to fostering business agility. One of these qualities is how well do the members of your organization understand the work that they are doing today and how that work maps to the ultimate objectives that the organization is trying to achieve. And are they given the ownership that is necessary to adjust their work in order to best meet those objectives? Organizations who successfully achieve business agility most often operate by specifying their desired objectives and then empowering those lower in the organization to decide how they can best achieve those objectives, rather than simply defining a set of detailed projects for the teams to tackle in hopes that those projects might lead to success. This is because Agile organizations realize that those who are closest to the work are the best equipped to decide how to do that work and how to do so in a way that achieves their desired objectives. Another indicator of how conducive an organization's culture is towards achieving agility is how that organization treats failed initiatives. For example, do unpromising initiatives continue long past the time that they should have been stopped, simply out of a fear of admitting failure? Or are failed initiatives quickly swept under the rug, squandering the ability to learn from those failures in hopes of achieving more success the next time? This is because successful organizations realize that they often have more to learn from their failures than from their successes. But truly considering why an initiative failed and what could be done differently in the future to help that same initiative succeed, an organization starts to take its first steps towards becoming a learning organization, which is the best way for that organization to survive unexpected disruptions in the marketplace. Now, before we move on, I do want to address a question that often comes up whenever we discuss business agility. And that question is, do we need a flat organization to truly achieve business agility? Now, to be fair, the idea of a flat organization is often associated with agile approaches, but a flat organizational structure might not be right for every organization. So rather than asking whether you need to restructure your entire organization into a flat organizational structure on your journey to business agility, I would instead ask you to look beyond the org structure itself and ask what qualities are often present in those organizations who have reorganized into a flat structure, and then decide whether you can achieve those same qualities in your organization without undertaking a major organizational restructuring. For example, some of the most common positive qualities that you might see in a flat organization might include psychological safety, which is an indicator of how safe your employees feel expressing their honest opinions, including dissent, inside of your organization. Organizations with low levels of psychological safety often suffer from a loss of transparency, which can lead to failed projects, missed expectations, and, of course, low employee morale, which inevitably will result in low employee engagement. But what's more, low psychological safety can even hamper the levels of innovation present in a company, as employees might not feel comfortable tackling the risks that are necessary in order to pursue innovative new projects. Another quality that's often associated with flat organizations is small and cross-functional teams. Generally speaking, smaller teams work more effectively. They incur less risks and they deliver faster. In addition, organizing these same small teams into a cross-functional manner allows them to deliver more value without taking too many dependencies on other teams in the organization. This increased independence allows these teams to respond more quickly and nimbly to unexpected events, because responding to these events is likely to only necessitate a disruption to that one single team. And finally, building on the concept of cross-functional teams, another trait that you might see successful teams in a flat organization is that the members of those teams are empowered to make whatever decisions are necessary to deliver the work that's required to achieve those desired objectives. Now, we've already spoken about empowering your team to choose the work that's necessary to achieve your organization's objectives, but successful teams are also empowered to do the work with little interference from outside of the team. For example, product managers and product owners working with the team should be empowered to make trade-offs and prioritization decisions to maximize the value that their team will deliver without having to seek approval from someone higher in the organization, who is therefore more detached from the problem at hand. Or the team as a whole should be empowered to deploy code to environments other than their own development environments in the spirit of delivering value quickly, as well as responding to any developments in the market after that delivery occurs. While many of these traits are often seen in organizations who have adopted a flat organizational structure, and admittedly, a flat org structure does make achieving these qualities easier, adopting a flat organizational structure is not a requirement to do so. To be clear, I'm not discouraging you from pursuing a flat organizational structure, because a flat org structure can be very powerful in the hands of the right organization. But instead, I'm asking you to realize that attempting a full organizational transition in pursuit of a flat organizational structure can be a very significant undertaking for any organization. And it's an undertaking on which many organizations often stall before it's ever completed, which can derail their entire agile transition. But what's more, while flat organization does enable many of the traits that we spoke of before, transitioning to a flat organization does not magically create them. There are plenty of organizations out there who have a flat org structure but still exhibit anti-patterns such as low levels of psychological safety or unempowered team members. So while a flat organization can be helpful in the right circumstances, it's not a magic wand. So rather than ask, do I need a flat organizational structure to achieve business agility? I would encourage you to instead ask if you can achieve these same traits in the context of your current organizational structure. Now, before we wrap up, I'd like to talk about how we can measure the progress that we're making towards achieving business agility. Now, like many concepts in Agile, the best way to measure your progress is going to be different for every organization. However, there are two qualities that I'd like to share that I have often found make an excellent starting point for measuring the value that your teams are delivering. The first is to ask, how often are you shipping product to your customers? As we've discussed before, one of the greatest benefits of achieving business agility is that it enables you to release to market much more frequently, which allows your organization to sense and to respond to changes in your market more rapidly. To that end, how often you're actually getting code into the market can be a great indicator of your progress towards business agility. Now, I recognize that sometimes your ability to ship on a more frequent cadence can be limited by your customers' willingness to accept updated code. And for that reason, some organizations might consider the frequency of how often code is integrated to be a valid proxy for actually releasing code to customers. While I do agree that how frequently your code is integrated can be an important metric, it is in no way an adequate proxy for shipping to customers, since part of your goal is to measure your customers' response to your product, and then to decide how you can adapt accordingly. If your customers aren't actually seeing your latest code, then you won't have the information that you need to decide how and when you need to adapt your product. The second metric that I'd like for you to consider is how often is your roadmap for your organization updated, as this can tell you how adaptive your organization is to changing its overarching objectives in order to meet new changes and new disruptions in the marketplace. Now, not surprisingly, there is no magic number for this. The right number is going to vary for every industry and for every organization within those industries. But as a rule of thumb, I believe that most strategic roadmaps should be updated more often than annually, but probably not quite as often as weekly. So I always recommend quarterly as a nice place to start. However, if your roadmap doesn't seem to change significantly during these quarterly updates, then you might consider revisiting it every 4 months or maybe even every 6 months. But if your roadmap seems to be changing dramatically during every quarterly update, then maybe monthly is a better cadence for your organization. Whatever the right frequency is, regularly revisiting your strategic objectives and then ensuring that your roadmap reflects the most current picture of those objectives will help your entire organization stay on track towards delivering the work that is going to matter the most. Now, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join me today in this discussion of how you can achieve business agility inside of your organization. Once again, my name is Jeremy Jarrell, and if you'd like to continue this discussion, then I encourage you to reach out. You can contact me directly through my website, www.jeremyjarrell.com, or through LinkedIn. And I'll be resharing that contact information at the end of this session. So please reach out to me. I'd love to connect, and I'd love to continue the discussion further. Now, I believe that we have some time for a few questions, so I'd like to take the chance to address some of the questions that have been submitted during today's session. Okay, I'll be looking at today's questions. Okay, so one of the questions is I spoke a little bit about the benefits that can occur with a flat organization, and what type of qualities, positive qualities, that we tend to look for those. The question is, are there any negative qualities or concerns that we should be looking for in a flat organization? That's a really good question, and that's one that comes up pretty often. One of the biggest things that I tend to look for in a flat organization, or one of the biggest kind of anti-patterns that I tend to look for is I mentioned that some flat organizations can exhibit a low level of psychological safety. That comes from the inherent transparency that's coming from a flat organization. Some people may not feel comfortable with the exposure and, like I said, with the inherent transparency that tends to come from those organizations. So that's something to really watch for. Are the members of your organization, or are your team members comfortable actually existing in a flat organization, or do some people like the inherent privacy that comes with a more structured and hierarchical organization? And we've got another question here from Omar. It says, can DevOps be considered agile in this context? I would say absolutely. And, it's interesting. We talk a lot about DevOps, and DevOps has really gotten a lot of attention in a couple of years. And, as someone who's an agile coach and spends a lot of time working with agile teams and organizations, one of the challenges that we see is like, where does DevOps fit in the agile landscape, and how does it actually relate to agile? I don't think we have an official answer on that, and I don't know if we even really need one. What I would say is that what I like about DevOps is that it exhibits and encourages a lot of the same qualities that we also tend to encourage with more traditional agile approaches like Scrum. DevOps really focuses a lot on team collaboration, team interaction, cross-functional teams, which I mentioned a little bit in the seminar, and really just kind of breaking down silos between teams. So I think that DevOps fits very, very well there. I think that also one of the greatest advantages that DevOps has that honestly we haven't really talked about as much in the traditional agile methodologies is that DevOps really affects delivery, and delivery is a function. To me, it really talks about delivery, and delivery is a function. So it really addresses how to make teams more effective in delivering code to market. So I think thinking about that one of our goals with business agility is to be able to get into the market sooner, so your organization can understand what the response to your product is and what they need to do next. DevOps dovetails just perfectly with that because it really encourages your team to get into the market as quickly as effectively as possible. So that's a great question. Let's see. So Rick has a question. What is your scope of ship to customers? We deploy weekly and sometimes daily, but there are mostly production support fixes that are not necessarily feature releases. So my scope personally of ship to customers is anything that goes out into the market, no matter how large and small it is. If it goes out in the market live in production and it touches customers, I consider that a ship point on or as a ship date or shipping event. I would say as a general rule, I always encourage smaller shipping events. I would much rather see an organization ship small batches of code weekly or every 2 weeks versus batching everything up into a very large drop and shipping that every 2 months or 3 months. But I would say that I consider anything that goes live in the market and touches customers to be a shipping event. So in this case, if it even is just a small bug fixes or small addresses or that address known bugs in the market, I would absolutely consider that a shipping event. And the reason that I say that is that any shipping event is an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to see how your customers respond. So even just putting out what might just be superficially considered, oh, these are some small enhancement tweaks or small bug fixes, there's still a learning opportunity there if you look for it, because your customers may not respond to the way you chose to address that bug, or may not respond to what to you seemingly is a minor enhancement the same way that you do. So all those shipping events are an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to address course. Okay, we have another question. What's the best way to overcome leadership resistance? That's a great question as well. And that's something that often comes up in an agile transition, especially as I talked about, really the key to a full organizational transition, which is what's necessary to achieve business agility, is actually getting buy-in from agile on the top down. And I want to clarify, teams or organizations can adopt agile very, very successfully even if they only choose to adopt agile in the context of their IT organization or in the context of a handful of teams of development. That can still be a successful agile adoption, and there are still benefits that come from that albeit in a limited context. But in order to achieve the full level of business agility that we talk about here, we're making business decisions and we're pivoting where the business is going based on what we're learning from the marketplace. That has to be a full hopefully top-down transformation. The biggest way that I would see to overcome the leadership resistance is not necessarily think of the leadership as resisting, but understand, one, what their concerns are, why they might be hesitant to undertake this undertake this with the organization. Did they have a bad experience in the past that they are now anchored to? And you have to kind of try to tease that apart and understand what there might be some historical resistance there, or is it just not something that they don't see the benefit of? It's like, oh, this is something that, yeah, our programmers probably benefit from, that it's not something that we need to think about as an organization. So the first part is understanding where that resistance is coming from. But then the next step, and the more important step, is to be able to help them understand the value to the business that the value to the business that this enables, what the value is to their reducing, or sorry, what the value is to reducing their costs, increasing their margin, what the potential value is to adding top line revenue that might be coming in, and helping them understand this in the context of, this is how this benefits your business. And and oftentimes the word agile doesn't really come up in those conversations, and I can promise you the words like Scrum and Kanban almost never do, because those are methodologies, those are tactical ways of achieving these goals. But when we're talking at the leadership level, we're most interested in helping the leaders understand, here are the goals that you're already trying to achieve for your business. You're trying to become more efficient. You're trying to increase your margins. You're trying to increase your revenue that's coming in the door. You're trying to increase shareholder value, increase customer retention. These are goals that you already have your business that you're trying to achieve. Let's talk about how this can help contribute to these goals and help enable to these goals. So it's really understanding where that resistance might have been coming from in the first place, but more importantly, helping them understand, here are the same values and the same goals that you're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve the same thing. Let's talk about how this relates to the context that you're already living in. So Mike has a great question on strategic planning. Mike asks, with regard to the strategic planning cadence, is it better to start with a higher frequency, like monthly, get people into that mode of thinking, and then transition to less frequently, i.e. quarterly? Yes. So this is, I think this is absolutely a personal style. But when I work with teams, if I'm starting with something that I don't really know what the right cadence for an event is going to be, whether this be a sprint plan, if it's a Scrum team, or in the context of business agility, what the right cadence for strategic planning is really going to be for an organization. What I always like to usually start quicker, or start somewhere, maybe not as quick as we could go, but somewhere on the quicker side of the spectrum, and then understand if we can back it off. And I mentioned some of the signals in the session about what I look for. So, for example, if we start monthly and we start coming back after probably not the second month, the third month, but maybe after about 4 months, 5 months of a monthly cadence, you know what, the roadmap isn't really, it isn't really changing that much. Things aren't really addressing, or just the natural business cycles that we're living in seem to be longer than a month, so we don't really have the information to kind of make decisions on the monthly cycle. That would be the opportunity that we would start backing off. But I like to start quicker, and the reason is that I have found across the board with any sort of cadence where we're trying to any sort of planning where we're trying to find the right cadence, is that it's much easier to start fast and then start taking meetings off of someone's calendar and sounds like having the conversations like, hey, you know what, we're not really getting a lot of value out of this monthly. Let's start talking about coming back in 2 months or coming back 3 months, versus to start like at a quarterly level and say, hey, this is what we're not going fast enough. We need more information. Let's start having this same 2-hour meeting every month or every 2 months. And so it's always easier to take meetings off of someone's calendar, especially at the leadership level where you're often having these conversations, than it is to add new ones. So I would encourage you to start with a more frequent cycle if it monthly turns out to be what's right for your team. And then if it feels like that, okay, that's too fast, we're not getting as much value out of that, then pull it down, because you'll meet much less resistance, essentially giving people their time back and taking things off of their calendar than happen if you have already pushed them into a planning meeting in the first place that they might have resisted, and then saying, okay, now we've got to do this more frequently. So let's see. I'm looking at a few more here. Okay, so Omar has a good question. Some people say that Agile is not a good option when you want to set KPIs and Agile is not a good option when you want to set KPIs. In your experience, what is the most common KPIs that are specific to Agile? That's a really good question. So I actually, when I'm looking at the actual strategic level, the business agility level, I don't really look too much at any Agile specific KPIs. There are Agile specific KPIs that I might look at when I'm working with a team, and we're really thinking more about the delivery of the team. So we're looking at things like throughput. We're looking at things like business value created. I tend to stay away from velocity. I don't think velocity is really that good of a KPI for a team. But when I'm looking, that's all at the team level. When I'm looking at the actual business level, and I'm trying to understand whether an organization is reaching business agility, I absolutely look at KPIs, but there isn't anything that's really Agile specific. So I mentioned two of them a little bit in the session. One of the big ones is basically how often are you actually getting your code into the market. I find that to be a very good proxy, a very good metric for how responsive and how adaptive an organization is potentially becoming. We obviously want the other side of that, not just, oh, they're shipping weekly, but they don't seem to be learning. Learning from that, there's nothing coming back in. So that's really only half the battle, which is honestly true for any KPI. Any KPI is at the end of the day is to often nothing more than just a finger in the wind, just to say, does it feel like we're on the right track? Or does it not? So, but that's one thing I look at is how often is an organization getting product into the market. The other ones that I tend to look at are the realized revenue that's coming from the work that the team is doing, and then the customer satisfaction. Net Promoter Score, NPS, is a very good simple metric for customer satisfaction. So that's one I recommend. Is very easy to implement. There are a lot of libraries out there. It's a very well-known system. So there are a lot of libraries out there that make it very easy to drop into a product. The what I would caution with Net Promoter Score, I find that Net Promoter Score yields the most value when the team is shipping very frequently. If a team is shipping code into market every 3 months or every 4 months, there's a lot of changes that are coming in each of those ship events. So Net Promoter Score doesn't give you a lot of insight. You might have a very good Net Promoter Score for your product. You might make your first ship event, say, in 4 months, and your Net Promoter Score plummets. Okay, well that's a little bit informative in the sense that you did something wrong. But if you have that slow of a ship cadence, there were probably 50 changes or 50 new feature sets and capabilities in that last production drop that you now have to go back and peel back and figure out, okay, well, what happened? Which of these did we do that really upset people and caused our Net Promoter Score to plummet? So that's why I think Net Promoter Score makes a lot more sense if your team is shipping more frequently, because if you're tracking your Net Promoter Score over time, let's say your team is shipping weekly, if on 1 week your Net Promoter Score suddenly plummets, it's much easier to go back and say, oh, okay, well, we shipped code on Monday. Let's see what was in there. Oh, there were 2 features in there. So one of these things has really upset people. So there's the opportunity to kind of pull that down. The other thing, the other thing I look at that also is a business metric that I just treat as a KPI that I think can be very useful for Agile teams is, well, what is the actual monetary value of the work that you're doing? And there are a lot of ways. There are a lot of ways to measure that depending on the goals of the work the team is doing. If it's a customer facing project that you're hoping generates direct revenue, if it's something that potentially creates indirect revenue downstream, if it's something that isn't actually customer facing but increases your margin because it makes some operation in the organization more efficient, really just being able to track that and identify that and tie to that is a very very good metric for any team to follow. I always really encourage teams to do that. And whenever I'm working with a team, one of the things that I personally really focus on as a coach is helping the team understand as soon as they start work on a new capability or a new feature set that's coming into product is, okay, let's talk about how are we going to know if this is successful? What's the one or two metrics that are going to tell us that this is important? Is there some sort of a revenue number that we can tie to? Is there a user engagement metric that we're looking at as far as how many people are actually interacting with this? Are they interacting with this on long term? And just starting there and helping teams understand that, because there often is a lot of resistance when we say, okay, well, we need to, at the very beginning of this product, choose what's going to make this successful or think about how we're going to understand whether or not this is successful. There often is a lot of resistance to that because we hear, well, we don't have the information. We don't know how this product is going to really shake out to know which piece of our revenue this is going to drive or know how our customers are going to interact with. And that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Because part of business agility or agility in general is recognizing that yeah, we need to start somewhere. We start with some metrics, but our first guess of how to solve this or our first choice in this is probably not going to be right. We're probably going to get it wrong the first time, the second time, the first 3 times. We're probably going to get it wrong a couple of times, but we don't know. We're not going to know we're wrong until we at least make some sort of a guess, until we make some sort of an answer. So going through the exercise to think about, okay, well, if I'm shipping this brand new feature set, how am I going to know that this is actually adding tangible value to my organization? Can be a very informative exercise because it forces you to really think about, well, what part of my product is this enhancing, or what part of my brand is this enhancing, and how do we understand if it actually is enhancing the way it is, and putting it out there and having that first ship event and saying, okay, well, people seem to like this, but the metric that we thought was really going to be indicative of success is not helpful at all. Or actually, I'd say the more often outcome is putting it out there and saying, hey, this metric that essentially was a vanity metric that we thought was going to be very indicative of how great this is doing. This metric is off the charts, but we're getting feedback that people hate this feature. So just kind of thinking about that and just learning from that and say, okay, well, where is a disconnect? Let's do another iteration and revise again. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I would really like to drive home with that part of the conversation is to help you understand that, yeah, whenever we're shipping product in an agile fashion, it's a very incremental experience. We always say, it's a marathon, not a sprint. That gets overused a lot, but the idea is that you're probably not going to get your product right the first time. I can almost virtually guarantee you won't. So there's going to be a lot of iterations to get there. It is the same with measuring the success of that product or measuring the impact of that product. You're not going to get how to get that measure or how to measure and how to understand the metrics right the first time either. So expect to have to iterate multiple times on what metrics seem to really be the most indicative about whether or not the work your team is doing is actually adding value to your company. Okay, Mike has a question. Have you found earned value analysis to be helpful in working with agile teams? So that's a very good question. I've used that with a couple of teams, and I have, but I'm going to caveat it. I have found. And this actually harkens back to the answer I just gave. I have found that going through the practice of conducting earned value analysis with a team and thinking about how we're going to actually measure those value points and think about what that's going to look like for the team. Just the exercise of going through that can be very informative because it really illustrates a lot of what we expect from that product and actually getting out of that, and like whether or not that product is is resulting in a tangible benefit for the organization. So I think I think it can be very beneficial to go through think about how to say this. I can be very, very beneficial to go through an exercise like earned value analysis with a lot of products or a lot of teams to really think about what's going to be considered the context or the criteria for this to be successful, and how are we going to actually measure that value accumulated over time. I typically do not share that with the team, and the reason is that it's nothing against EVA specifically. It's that I'm very careful about what metrics that I share with the team, because any metric that you share with the team, that you put a large emphasis on a team with, it becomes subject to be gamed at that point. And this was I mentioned when I talked about the KPIs. There are certain metrics I look at on a team level. Velocity is not one of those metrics. The reason is, and I want to turn this into a conversation of beating up on velocity, but the reason is that velocity is a very, very easy metric to game. It's very easy for teams to get attached to, and at the end of the day, I found that many team level metrics actually really they actually measure the busyness of a team, how busy a team is versus the value the team is creating. So most of the metrics that we look at the team level are really focused on how much work the team is doing or how busy they are during a given time box, not whether the work that's the result of that work, the outcome of that work is actually the right work, or if it's providing any value at all. So that's why I tend to downplay those metrics a bit, because I think they distract the team and they encourage the team to focus on the wrong things. I see the same thing. I see the same thing with EVA to a lesser extent, because there is a value assignment that comes into EVA. That's why I said that I think the illustration and going through that can be very helpful to really think about how you're going to measure that. But I typically downplay the whole activity of that with a team, just to try to keep keep the team focused on the outcome that they're producing rather than the actual work that we're doing. Okay, I think we have time for one last question. So Mike also asked, are there tools from Lean or Six Sigma that we can use to help agile teams? So yeah, so I would think absolutely. So I'm not incredibly familiar with Six Sigma. I'm familiar with that at a superficial level, but not enough that I feel comfortable really speaking to it. But I will say that I'm very familiar with most of the Lean qualities and the Lean traits that underlie Six Sigma. And also they really underlie most of the modern agile methodologies like Scrum and Kanban. I think there absolutely are there are practices in Lean that are very valuable to working with teams. Well, the big two that I look at is that Lean has a constant focus on reducing waste and really kind of really doing a value stream map of what your team is doing to produce value, and figuring out what the actual true value producing activities in that stream are, and focusing on that, and also understanding what activities the team is going through in the act of producing value that really don't seem to be that helpful, and really think about which really would be considered waste. And it's interesting too, because I actually have been thinking about Lean a lot with the team, and one of the things that we've talked about. We talk about that is that when we talk about Lean has very much a focus on kind of dividing work into this is a value producing activity or this is a waste activity. And it's very obvious, yes, we want to focus on the value producing activities and we want to minimize the waste activities. But it's interesting. I used to often think of, if it's a waste activity, it's something that we want to remove entirely. But when you look at a lot of, especially the recent literature on Lean, that is actually downplayed a bit, in the sense that it's more important to just kind of recognize that, yes, there are certain activities that would be considered waste activities, but not in the sense that they're either inserting waste into the system should be removed. It's more in the sense that they are not the activities that are providing direct value to customers. So one of the good examples that comes into that is the act of estimating stories for a sprint or for a time box if your team is following Scrum. So we often talk about, to actually plan a team, plan at the organization, at the team level, the organizational level, where we have to have estimation. We have to understand that estimation. And if you look at if you look at through the lean lens, you can really look at estimation and understand, well, estimation would actually technically be considered waste because the act of a team sitting in a room for 4 hours estimating stories does not directly add value to what the customer is getting at the end of the day. So it falls into the waste category. However, there are valuable byproducts that come out of that discussion. The ability to project long term, the ability to plan in the short term, and of course the invaluable ability to grow shared understanding across the team, to have the team build an understanding together of how they might address that problem and what the pitfalls with that problem is. So it does produce some value to the process, but it's not, if you look at it through the lean lens, it's value to the organization itself. It's not direct value to the end customer, so it would be considered waste. So but because it's waste, does that mean that we drop it? No, but it probably means that we bear in mind that it is technically a waste-producing activity. So we should minimize it and only focus on where it really adds value. So I think that that's just one example. But I think looking at a lot of things that came out of lean manufacturing, the lean principles that influence a lot of this, a lot of those still hold true today and are still very, very valuable. And honestly, I think it can be more valuable for a team to learn than almost anything else that really they're working on today. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation, Jeremy. And then thank you to everyone for asking those wonderful questions. There's been a lot of great material shared today, but I just wanted to give Jeremy the chance to share maybe one final thought with the audience before we end here.
Great. Yeah. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have me. And of course, thank you everyone on the webinar today for joining me this afternoon. I would just like to remind everyone that achieving business agility can be a long journey, but it's not something that happens overnight. But with patience, perseverance, and a clear definition of the goals that you're trying to achieve, I want everyone to realize that any organization can achieve the level of business agility that's necessary to successfully sense and to respond to changes in its market while still continuously delivering value to its customers along the way. So I've just shared my contact information. Once again, if you have any questions or if you want to continue the discussion, please don't hesitate to reach out to me either through Twitter, LinkedIn, or just connect with me directly on my website. I'd love to continue the conversation from here or love to address further any of the questions that came up today. So thank you.